Good evening, dear friends. We're in the Pine Gate Meditation Hall. Today is the April 8th, 2017. Now I'm going to talk to you today about a manifesto for the future. And this is going to be a little bit of a journey. I'll be looking at the trainings, the mindfulness trainings, and then looking at the disconnect amongst many Western Buddhists with what the trainings are trying to guide them. I'm also going to be talking about climate change and Donald Trump's cabinet of bigotry. And the good news is, I will finish with a pushback from Buddhist leaders in the United States, which is long overdue. And don't be surprised if at the end I issue a call for action. And that is action from me and also from you. So let me start at the beginning. Now, as a Zen teacher, I make a commitment not to cause harm. And I'm guided by spiritual ethics, yet I'm completely aware of the disastrous state of affairs on our planet and on our civilization. But that awareness will not bring forth strategic plans of how to fix things. And I could go on and on about all the terrible stuff that's happening on our planet at this time. And I'll divert to that in a moment. But the bottom line for me is to refine a system of ethical conduct. So I go deeper into meditation and mainly fix myself to be steady and insightful. And in this process, I always register with the mindfulness trainings. As the mindfulness trainings brings out all that I would like to see in people around the planet, especially people around me. And the bottom line for me is that awakening and mindfulness are active. These are not passive. And I think activism on its own doesn't have the inner resources to maintain effective social and planetary transformation. So I know from personal experience that retraining the wild mind is necessary. That's the necessary ingredient to accompany and often precede activism. So being environmental or political on its own can lead to a sort of sedentary agitation that plays out on Facebook. Lots of posts. No one is going anywhere. We have environmental, political, social parts to us, but until the internal side is in place, we're not going to be very effective. At the moment, on the planet, we have no alternative but to concentrate on sustainable living, rather than exploiting the spoils of perpetual economic growth. And you don't have to be a space scientist to realize that profit cannot be the sole reason for commerce. There must be responsibility tied into that equation. And all this is to say that at the present moment, we're totally out of sync with the Earth's resources. And the fragile threads of ecosystems around the globe are severely compromised. So we're in a conundrum. We can either go down the collective sewer or change our values in the direction of awakening through adhering to the mindfulness trainings or something like them. Now, for the dire warnings of what's happening to us, I'd like to call in people I greatly respect. I begin with Jane Goodall. She issued a warning in 2016 that life is hanging by a thread. And she was thinking of the tropical deforestation that's happening. And what she advocated was to create programs that stop tropical deforestation by making rural communities custodians of those forests. Very sensible, but very difficult to put into action because we have President Trump, an influential leader. He's begun the dismantling of environmental regulations, not just in the United States, but giving the opportunity for it to be followed in other nations. The United States is ignoring climate change, obstructing clean energy, and many forms of conservation. And Noam Chomsky, again late in 2016, refers to Trump's priorities as racing as rapidly as possible to the destruction of organized human life. Stephen Hawking, in December 2016, he wrote a very thoughtful piece in the Guardian newspaper in Britain. And he was focusing on elite behavior and how elite behavior creates further inequality. And he examines Brexit and the Trump presidency. And his question is, how will the elites change? Because if they don't change, things are only going to get worse. And he states, and I quote, "We're living in a world of widening, not diminishing financial inequality, and people see only a slim chance at earning a living at all." Hawking acknowledges this dangerous moment in humanity's evolution. He's looking at a very big picture and just where we are located. And we have to remember what we're on in terms of this planet. Like, Earth is like a giant living cell. All parts are linked symbiotically. And the biologist Thomas Lewis created this metaphor with humanity just as one small part of a vast system. Now, this notion of the Earth as a cell and humanity as just being one component of it is not something that powerful and corporate people have paid much attention to. So the reality we face is that the life support systems of the planet are severely threatened by climate change, aided by accelerating global consumerism. And it's our ignorance and neglect that's destroying the Earth, because we don't know how to respect ourselves, others, and the planet. So unless we radically change, there is no possibility of balance, environmentally or socially. And this came very clear in my filmed distance course, Ecology in Culture, at Carleton University in Ottawa. I wanted to connect the many levels of violence and fear that we engage with to the environment, and also connect them to the everyday use of harmful speech and mindless consumption. Because with ethical guidelines rooted in spiritual practice, I'm convinced that we won't generate the energy that enables terror and violence to grow. So by comparing an everyday situation to an overall climate of fear, hatred, and vengeance, I'm suggesting that it's all much the same. Mindless consumption, harmful speech, terrorism, destruction of the planet. It's all the same stuff. And these issues that I'm just throwing out at the moment, these were examined with great clarity by the awakened mind of the Buddha 2,600 years ago. And his teachings are timeless, as relevant to the modern world as when first spoken. Now, the Buddha taught the 5 mindfulness trainings as a design for living. Thich Nhat Hanh reworked them in the 90s and the first decade of this century so that the trainings would relate to modern realities. And the mindfulness trainings are non-sectarian, and all spiritual traditions have some equivalence with them. The first training, as you can see on the chart up there, is to protect life, to decrease violence in oneself, family, and society. The second training is to practice social justice, generosity, and not exploit other beings. The third training is responsible sexual behavior for all people, to protect couples, families, and children. The fourth training is the practice of deep listening and loving speech, so we can restore communication and foster reconciliation. The fifth training is about mindful consumption, which helps us not to bring toxins and poisons into our body or mind. Now, I asked the students in my ecology and culture class, which was being televised, if anyone would care to read them out to their classmates during my lecture on environmental ethics. The environmental ethics I was talking about was the 5 mindfulness trainings as environmental ethics. There were many volunteers to do this, and I did wonder at the time if this borrowing from Buddhism would go over well with students and the viewing audience. Much to my surprise, students and the public viewers wrote in to tell me that this was a wake-up call, the first time they had been presented with specific environmental ethics. But let me be clear about the trainings, which I was sponsoring, if you like, as environmental ethics. The trainings are not there to judge others. They are an internal guide so that as individuals we wake up to love and compassion. And we take heed of the directions that the mindfulness trainings take us in. So the trainings are not a coercive design for conformity. They simply assist us to be more aware of what is going on around and within us. Quite simply put, they enable us to distinguish what is good for ourselves, our minds, and the world, and what is not. And I've never seen it necessary as being able to complete the practice perfectly. I don't think that's possible. It's, however, possible to move in the direction of responsible and ethical living and make a difference to our society and environment. Because we have a simple question. Do we bring to violence, indifference, and terror a renewed application of the same? Or do we step back, muster our energies, and seriously consider these teachings as ethics to live by? There is a solution to our present situation. Our leaders, I'm putting this as kindly as I can, our leaders have often become trapped by corporate and electoral agendas. They follow a similar script. They do not have awakened minds. And very few of them have ethics. and they all have some avocation for the use of violence. So large-scale change is difficult to find within this kind of system of hypocrisy. But the Buddha offers a path. The implications of his 5 mindfulness trainings apply to the dangerous times we live in. And I feel that our world needs guidelines like these. And the flip side to global violence is the growing concern over the absence of love, decency, and compassion in daily public life. This preoccupies and worries many citizens and scholars, and it certainly preoccupies and worries me. So if there's ever been a time to learn anew from these teachings from the Buddha, it is now. So when we touch base with the 5 mindfulness trainings, we're being reminded to wake up. Neglect, terror, and fear are states of mind. Therefore, we need tools that reconnect us to a mind state driven by love, decency, and positivity. So the 5 mindfulness trainings are presented as an antidote to the contemporary crisis. The ethics of the 5 mindfulness trainings, as my ecology and culture class a few years back, they endorsed and saw that this could provide a balance. They took in the idea of the 5 mindfulness trainings as environmental ethics, as guidelines to behave towards the earth and other people in a particular kind of way. So, in addition to addressing social and environmental crises, the building of inner spiritual strength through meditation and mindfulness is crucial. That is one point I want to keep in your vision. But here's the thing. We have to be critical, especially in the 21st century. And we have to be critical about re-educating the 5 mindfulness trainings so that they're relevant to the present day. They are indeed a guidance system of ethics to encourage us to no longer participate in a non-sustainable economic system driven by greed and distraction. And this global ethic is in fact our protector, as it helps us to stop, look deeply, and throw away our harmful patterns of behavior. Now, crises such as climate change prompt us to refresh and refine the trainings. But as we'll see, there's some awkward disconnects in the creation of the trainings, and also how Buddhists in the West relate to these trainings. Now, the Buddha was very clear about impermanence and new challenges. He created the 5 mindfulness trainings for the lay community, and he told Ananda, his faithful attendant, that the minor precepts should be revised according to the culture and the time. But Ananda and the Buddhist elders were confused about which precepts were the minor ones and misunderstood what the Buddha was talking about. So nothing changed for 2,600 years. There's no preparation or anticipation for modern realities, as monastic precepts have not changed very much, and they are not equipped to handle issues ranging from internet, terrorism, a world full of refugees, and climate change. There's no preparation for this. And the seeds of disconnect are not just with how we relate to the trainings, but with Dharma in general. And the disconnect, to my mind, reveals itself in terminology. This is where I've become a real grammar geek. Minor precepts refer to the 5 mindfulness trainings for lay people, while major precepts define monastic ethics. This language creates a divide between lay and monastic, with the latter considered as superior, which is certainly not the case. I do not think monastics are superior to lay. In the modern era, it is the lay Dharma teachers who are in society, working in the trenches of everyday life, creating transformation in alliance with many other groups of lay people. Whereas the monastic community is secluded, cut off from everyday reality, then not in a position to create transformation in the wider society. Now, this disconnect is a marker of modern Buddhism in the West. It was noted by David Loy, who is an ecologist, in his excellent article in Buddha Dharma. This was winter 2015. Loy addresses the current ecological crisis on the planet and questions the deep-rooted ambivalence within Buddhism towards it. And he asks, does the ecological crisis have nothing to do with Buddhism? And I add a further inquiry. Where are the Buddhist politicians, CEOs, entrepreneurs in political, ecological, and economic spheres? There's a wide disconnect in Western Buddhism between playing in the capitalist game of everyday life, yet only being concerned with the so-called peace of the inner self. The latter is the refuge we so readily withdraw to. And to my mind, this can never be satisfactory. Loy points out that the issue is structural as well as personal, making the challenge to Buddhism that of changing the economic and political systems rather than remaining in blissful denial. And he defines the two main obstacles as, first of all, changing the mind is where it's at. That's all we've got to do. Self-absorption in the separate self. That's the deal we take. The second is the beliefs of many Buddhist practitioners that we don't need to waste our time trying to reform the unsatisfactory world. We just concentrate on transcending it. This is BS. Big time. Both of these obstacles are major Dharma mistakes. Traps about higher spiritual reality that reflect disconnect in modern terms, preventing us from fully engaging with the trainings and the world. So social, political, and ecological engagements are devalued as we place our backsides on the cushion, chant, drink tea, and avoid the reality around us. So modern Buddhism in the West definitely needs a wake-up call. The basic premise of the Bodhisattva path is to walk it, not as a separate self, but as an engaged self. Then an authentic sense of awakening naturally extends into political, economic, and ecological spheres of potential action. And I agree with David Loy that the reconstruction of our mind necessarily involves the reconstruction of our world, economic, political, ecological, and spiritual. To separate spiritual from the other three is nonsense. And that's not what the Buddha was talking about. And I like Loy's comment that bodhisattvas have a double practice. As they deconstruct and reconstruct, they also work for social and ecological change. And such concerns are not distractions from our personal practice, but they're deeper manifestations of it. You cannot avoid what's going on ecologically, politically, or economically. This is a deeper manifestation of your practice. Deal with it. And I really like the way my teacher Thich Nhat Hanh was able to overcome this awkward divide. He created the Order of Interbeing during the Vietnam War. Socially engaged Buddhism was renewed in Vietnam by him and extended to the West. And Thich Nhat Hanh adorned the first 6 members of the Tet Hien Order in February 1966 during the Vietnam War. And to establish the order of interbeing, he created 14 mindfulness trainings, which are an elaboration of the 5. The 14 mindfulness trainings contain the 5 mindfulness trainings, the Noble Eightfold Path, and are a renewal of the earlier Bodhisattva precepts. And Thich Nhat Hanh brought them up to date, to modern time, to be in tune with our situation in the present time, to in step with modern historical, socioeconomic and cultural developments, yet resting on the foundation provided by the Buddha. Now, Thich Nhat Hanh's book, written at the same time, Lotus in a Sea of Fire, which was about being a Buddhist in the middle of a war, and the 14 ethical statements that he carefully sculpted, this presented a revolutionary statement of engaged Buddhism. And since 1966, the revolutionary part has been diluted, particularly in the West, where the disconnect noted by Loy is in full swing. The order of interbeing established by Thich Nhat Hanh seems in the 21st century to have morphed into an ineffective bureaucracy. The revolutionary edge of the 14 mindfulness trainings has somehow been swept to the side. Now, just in case you think it's just me who's out on a limb here, I want to bring in a very respected senior monk and scholar. This is Bhikkhu Bodhi, Theravada monastic. And he wrote in the spring 2017 issue of Buddha Dharma. First of all, the reason I really started to like him, he looked at Donald Trump's cabinet of bigotry. That's the words that he used. But at the same time, he noted the absence of Buddhists on a petition of objection to this cabinet of bigotry. It was signed by 2,500 religious leaders in the United States, and Bhikkhu Bodhi asked the obvious question: why are Buddhists not visible as advocates for peace, sanity, and social justice? Where are they indeed, given that Buddhism is the preeminent religion of peace and compassion? And he stated very forcibly that not to participate in active engagement with politics, environment, and worldly events runs counter to the Buddha path of enlightenment. He points out that Buddhists fail to realize that the battleground over power and position are ethical contests. We have to realize that Trump's ascendancy to power shakes every Buddhist mindfulness training. And this requires a strong pushback from Buddhist leaders. So where is our agenda of collective resistance? And we'll see that it's just beginning. I'll come to that. Bhikkhu Bodhi urges Buddhist advocacy in alliance with progressive leaders, religious and lay, to defend the United States' embattled democracy. And he leads the charge of relating to the trainings in a way that has no disconnect with present global concerns. You can see why I like him so much. And that's the point of this Dharma talk to you today. But there's nothing wrong with the trainings, apart from some essential rewording. But that's the grammar geek in me coming to the fore. The disconnect lies with contemporary Buddhists in the West who do not engage with the intent of the trainings laid out by the Buddha and by Thich Nhat Hanh. The trainings are right here, and they're okay. They're good. They're solid. Sound ethics. But do we engage with them from the vantage points of self-seeking, a separate self, alone on our cushion? Or do we engage with them with an open and full heart? And Bhikkhu Bodhi's stand, it struck a chord with Buddhist leaders. And this is all very, very recent. And I want to quote from an article in the May 27 edition of the Lion's Roar magazine. It's not out yet. I just got a prior squint at it. I want to quote from what they did. So let me quote. 13 leading Buddhist teachers, joined by over 200 additional signatories, called on Buddhists and all peoples of faith to take a stand against policies of the new United States administration that will create suffering for the most vulnerable in society. Feeling the reality of this suffering, we remember that peacefulness does not mean passiveness, and non-attachment does not mean non-engagement. Let me say that again. This is very, very important. Peacefulness does not mean passiveness, and non-attachment does not mean non-engagement. The Dharma is not an excuse to turn away from the suffering of the world, nor is it a sedative to get us comfortably through painful times. It, the Dharma, is a powerful teaching that frees and strengthens us to work diligently for the liberation of beings from suffering. While Buddhism has traditionally emphasized the personal cause of suffering, today we also discern how the three poisons, greed, aggression, and indifference, these three poisons operate through political, economic, and social systems to cause suffering on a vast scale. Then they have this to say. As we resist the heightened threat of many of the new administration's policies, we also recognize that underrepresented and oppressed communities in the United States have long suffered from systemic greed, aggression, aversion, and indifference. While some argue that the principle of non-duality suggests that Buddhists should not engage in or take sides on political or social issues, we believe the opposite is true. They're really turning the direction of Buddhism around. Let me say that again. It is because we and others are not separate that we must act. The principle of non-duality suggests that Buddhists should not engage in or take sides on political or social issues. We believe the opposite is true. This is a little bit like Martin Luther King hammering his manifesto. This is a manifesto that could change the direction of Buddhism. And I like it so much because it's how I've always thought about Buddhism. And here they come to recognize the non-Buddhists, the lay people, who are doing great things. It is true that our numbers are small, yet we can join with others who share our convictions and values. For those who are new to this, please remember that there are many people who have dedicated their lives to the work of social change. They have the useful skills of compassionate organizing and building sustainable movements. Find them, get involved, and learn from them. Now this is May 2017. We're not quite there yet, but it's in this latest edition of The Lion's Roar. This is a startling statement. And it's a strong statement. and it's one I totally endorse. And it could well bring Buddhism into what it was meant to be. Engaged, loving, decent, but engaged. If you want to walk the Bodhisattva, you walk it as an engaged being. So this manifesto, which is very, very important, brings me to the tricky role of impermanence. And this might be hard to grasp. Now, to change structures of elitism, greed, and corporate dominance requires a mass change in consciousness. We all know that. And mindfulness and the training supports that outcome. Now, the Buddha's teachings on impermanence also spur such a radical statement of the May 2017 statement in The Lion's Roar. Can we grasp the insight of extinction, of ourselves, of our civilization, even of the planet? Without the insight of impermanence, we will not be able to change our mindsets. We have to find a way to adjust to our changed political and environmental circumstances. We can no longer hold on to a view of how it once was. Once we can accept that we have created the present global situation, then and only then can we find a respite, discovering insights that bring radical change to our values, habits, and mindset. And it's very difficult in our Western culture to accept death. The usual response is fear and denial. So we have to re-educate our minds to get past these two obstacles. When we can recognize that our present form of civilization is dying, we will recognize that despair and denial will do us no good. We need only find the courage to surrender and rely on our practices of mindfulness to provide a measure of safety for ourselves. So instead of a denial, a space opens up in our mind for lucidity and steadiness to enter, which can propel our species to live differently. Now, such a future on Earth requires a mass awakening of attributes that run counter to the ecology of greed. It requires a candid acceptance that our global civilization in its present form is coming to an end. Such an acceptance of our true reality on the planet can alleviate the course of environmental collapse. The energy and power to avert the disaster facing us rests in our minds and in a new collective choice to live very differently. Thich Nhat Hanh, my teacher, brings this home to us in a direct and challenging way, making it very clear that any view not based on impermanence is wrong. He shows how the Buddha provided meditation and practices on impermanence for his followers so they could recognize that the only thing that follows death is the fruit of our actions and thinking, of our speech, and of our acts during our lifetime. Specifically on climate change, he is very blunt. If we continue to consume unwisely, if we don't care about protecting this wonderful planet, the ecosystem will be destroyed to a large extent, and we will need millions of years to start a new civilization. Everything is impermanent. We are our environment, which is in the process of self-destruction. If we can grasp that, if we can grasp the notion of impermanence, it brings a certain peace and clarity to our minds. Just perhaps we can implement ethics, structures, and technology to ensure a niche on this planet. We have a job to do in terms of cultivating a transformation in our consciousness, bringing about a new way of living in harmony with one another and on earth. We must deliberately cultivate positive ethical attributes in our minds. We have to shine the light of recognition and mindfulness on our suffering so that we can become steady and full of resolve to live differently. Our job is to shift the tide of negativity, change our mindset, and not squander our life. The 5 and 14 mindfulness trainings provide us with a template to do that, as we consciously choose to nurture patterns of behavior and habits that are wholesome, generous, kind. In other words, we make mindfulness practice our new habit. It is an internal transformation of consciousness at the core of our being. So I shape all of this stuff into something very simple. I have a personal mantra. That mantra is, I refrain from causing harm. I know that by refraining from one thing that causes harm, I then prevent other harmful things from happening. And I arrive at my own insight on this. It's not imposed by any outside authority. This is the simple mantra I do my best to follow every day. And it takes mindfulness to do this. And the 5 mindfulness trainings provide the starting point, a guidance system of ethics and a deep well to live by. My commitment is to actualize these trainings in my life and in the lives of others around me to the best of my ability. I promised you a call to action, and here it is. And I bring Bhikkhu Bodhi back into the conversation. In Buddha Dharma, spring 2017, he urges Buddhist advocacy in alliance with progressive leaders to defend the United States' embattled democracy from President Trump's cabinet of bigotry. He states, and I quote, "We can call in unison for a policy of global generosity in place of rash militarism, for programs that protect the poor and vulnerable, for the advancement of social and racial justice, and for the rapid transition to a clean energy economy. And bring the moral weight of the Dharma to bear on matters that affect the lives of people anywhere, now and long into the future." This statement was then followed by the stance taken by Buddhist leaders in the May 2017 issue of Lion's Roar magazine. So this is all happening very quickly and right at this time. I also call out the Hopi elders' prophecy of 2000. They say to us quite candidly, create your community. Be good to one another. And do not look outside yourself for your leader. That's really very important, because many people are looking for a Gandhi, a Martin Luther King, a Mandela. They're all dead. Don't look for anyone else. Look for yourself as a leader. And the Hopi were saying this way back in 2000. And see who is there with you and celebrate. Have a look at who's around you, who's influencing you, and who's draining you. See who is there with you and celebrate. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones we've been waiting for. For our part, I would suggest that we can do so many incredible things. We can work with municipalities, conservationists, and river keepers. That's a group of people who look after the rivers, to simply clean up our waterways and environment. Ensure that children in schools go with you and prepare them to handle things like cyberbullying and neglect. We must hold politicians and corporations to account and create coalitions with progressive organizations who share our love of kindness and decency. So I ask you to do something. Walk upon the earth lightly. Be fully here and present. Lightly. Thank you for listening to me.